My name is Lauren, and during the suffocatingly humid summer of 2022, I found myself delivering pizzas for a local joint called Dino's Pizza in Jacksonville, Florida. It wasn't the kind of career anyone dreams of, but the tips were consistent enough to keep my head above water and my bills paid. Most of my shifts were mind-numbingly routine: the same suburban streets, the same apartment complexes, and the same faces of bored, hungry customers blending into a singular blur. But every delivery driver knows there's always that one call, the one that makes you question why you ever stepped into the car in the first place. It was early August, and even at midnight, the Florida heat felt like a thick, wet blanket pressing against your skin. We had been absolutely slammed with orders all evening, forcing my shift to run much later than usual. As I was finally preparing to close out, a younger co-worker named Emma asked if I could give her a ride home since she didn't have a vehicle. I didn't mind the company, and she ended up tagging along for my final few runs of the night. My very last ticket appeared on the monitor at 11:50 p.m., directing me to an address on East 19th Street, a notorious part of town I usually made an effort to avoid. The neighborhood was a grim landscape of flickering streetlights, crumbling houses, and sidewalks carpeted in debris. We turned onto 19th Street right at the stroke of midnight. The silence was eerie, with most houses sitting in total darkness, while others were crudely boarded up with plywood. I slowed the car to a crawl, squinting at the GPS until it led me to a small, decaying, single-story house hidden behind a wall of overgrown hedges. The structure featured peeling white paint and a sagging front porch illuminated by a single dying light bulb that pulsed with a rhythmic flicker. I pulled up to the curb, kept the engine idling, and told Emma to stay in the car while I made the quick drop. Grabbing the hot pizza box, I walked up the cracked concrete driveway, my footsteps echoing in the dead air. I felt a heavy, instinctive weight in my chest telling me to turn back, but I dismissed it as mere exhaustion from a long shift. I climbed the porch and knocked twice on the weathered wood. A full minute passed before I heard the slow, heavy thud of footsteps from within. When the door finally creaked open, I was greeted by a man in his 40s with greasy hair and eyes so bloodshot they looked bruised. He stood there in nothing but a pair of filthy boxers, staring at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Without a word of greeting, he gestured vaguely toward the dark interior and said, "Just bring it inside and set it on the table. My hands are full." He showed me one empty hand, but his other arm remained suspiciously hidden behind the door frame, obscured by the shadows. I took a step back, my internal alarm bells screaming, and politely told him that store policy strictly forbade us from entering private residences. Truthfully, there was no such policy at Dino's, but it was the standard lie I used whenever a situation felt even slightly dangerous. His face transformed instantly, his eyes hardening into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. "Are you serious?" he growled, his voice dropping an octave. "I've had plenty of drivers do it before. Just get in here and put the pizza down." I tightened my grip on the box and stood my ground, repeating my refusal as calmly as I could. His voice became a low, menacing whisper as he commanded me once more to bring the food inside. Before I could even react, he lunged forward with terrifying speed, his fingers clamping around my wrist like a steel trap. The pizza box slipped from my hands, crashing onto the porch and spilling its contents across the filthy floorboards. I screamed for him to let go, but he was immensely strong, beginning to haul me bodily toward the pitch-black entryway of the house. I felt completely overwhelmed and powerless against his strength, but suddenly, the night air was shattered by the deafening blast of a car horn. Emma had realized I was in trouble. She had leaped into the driver's seat and was laying on the horn while flashing the high beams repeatedly. The sudden noise and blinding light startled the man just enough for his grip to falter, allowing me to wrench my arm free with desperate force. I bolted down the porch steps, nearly losing my footing as I sprinted back toward the safety of the idling car. I scrambled into the passenger side, screaming for Emma to drive, and she floored the accelerator, leaving the house and the ruined pizza in a cloud of exhaust. I was shaking so violently I couldn't speak, my wrist still burning where his fingers had bruised my skin. Back at the shop, my manager immediately contacted the authorities, but by the time the police reached East 19th Street, the man was long gone. Eerily, the neighbors informed the officers that the house had actually been abandoned for months. The police found the interior completely hollow. No furniture, no clothes, just a single dirty mattress on the floor and the spilled pizza on the porch. The property owner confirmed the house had been vacant and slated for demolition since April. I never delivered another pizza after that night. I had just celebrated my 17th birthday that summer, and taking on late-night shifts for Quick Dash Courier was my only way to save up for community college tuition. The job was straightforward: pick up a sealed parcel, scan the barcode, follow the GPS, and take a photo as proof of delivery. Usually my runs were to bright suburban porches or the secure lobbies of apartment complexes, though occasionally I'd have to venture into the industrial district. It was mostly a dull job, fueled by gas station coffee and the classic rock station on the radio to keep the sleep at bay. It was slightly past 11 p.m. when my dispatcher, a tired guy named Cole, radioed in a final priority order, a small prepaid brown box that needed a same-day rush delivery. He gave me the address, 301 Old Quarry Road, a place right on the jagged edge of town. The name of the road sounded vaguely familiar, located somewhere across the river where the city streets finally gave way to dense woods and gravel paths. I didn't complain about the distance, knowing that more miles usually translated to a higher payout on my weekly paycheck. I watched the city lights fade in my rearview mirror as I crossed the Cedar River, following the empty country roads out into the vast, dark fields. The mid-October air was biting and cold, and a thin layer of frost was already beginning to shimmer in the drainage ditches along the road. Every farmhouse I passed was a silhouette of darkness, save for the occasional flickering blue glow of a television through a distant window. About 20 minutes into the drive, my cell signal plummeted to a single bar, leaving me isolated in the pitch-black landscape. The GPS directed me to turn onto Old Quarry Road, but it was less of a road and more of a crumbling strip of asphalt being swallowed by weeds and rusted mailboxes. I slowed my van to a crawl, feeling the trees close in over the hood of the car like a tunnel of dead branches. When my high beams finally illuminated house number 301, it looked nothing like a habitable home. It was a rotting two-story farmhouse with peeling wood sitting at the end of a gravel driveway. Every window was either shattered or crudely patched with warped plywood. A moldy, yellowed newspaper from January sat forgotten in the mailbox, yet the GPS screen was insistent, displaying a bright green pin and the message, "Destination reached." I killed the engine, and the only sound was the clicking of cooling metal and the wind whistling through dead leaves. Everything in my gut told me this was a prank, and I reached for the gear shift to back out, but then I heard it. 3 slow, deliberate raps on the front door from inside the house. The door began to sway open, revealing nothing but a pitch-black abyss within the entryway. I checked the order form and dialed the customer's number. After 2 rings, I heard a voicemail that sounded like a person whispering from across a vast, empty room. The message was chillingly simple: "Leave the box and walk away." Then the line went dead. A spike of cold fear ran down my spine, but my pride wouldn't let me return to the depot and admit I was scared of an empty house. I grabbed the box, a plain cardboard package with no return label, and stepped out into the damp, crunching gravel. I walked onto the porch, which groaned under my weight, and set the package squarely on a welcome mat that had been worn down to nothing. I snapped a photo for proof of delivery, but when the camera flash faded, I saw a beam of light moving deep inside the house. That was the final straw. I scrambled back into the driver's seat and turned the key, but the engine only gave a dry, hollow click. The battery was suddenly and inexplicably dead. I looked in the mirror and saw the front door of the house swinging wide open. I watched in frozen horror as the brown box I had just delivered began to slide backward across the porch floor, as if being pulled by an invisible hand. The box disappeared into the house, and the front door slammed shut with a force that rattled the porch. In a panic, I popped the hood to check the battery, but everything looked perfectly intact. Then, the sound of nails dragging across glass began to screech from the front window. I abandoned the van and began sprinting down Old Quarry Road on foot. desperately searching for a signal. I was eventually picked up by a deputy named Matt, who took my incoherent story seriously enough to drive me back to the house in his cruiser. When we arrived, my van was still there, but the package on the porch had completely vanished. Matt searched the house with his sidearm drawn, but he found no power, no furniture, and no living soul inside the rotting structure. The only thing he recovered was an old Polaroid photo in a plastic bag, showing a different box on that same porch from 2018. We later discovered that the address had been condemned for years and was linked to the disappearance of a family back in 2018. Weeks later, I arrived home to find a plain brown box sitting on my own front porch. No label, no stamps, just my name written on it. Inside was a Polaroid taken from inside the dark hallway of House 301, showing me standing on the porch just weeks prior, looking terrified. I never worked the night shift again, and I still hear that whispering voicemail in my dreams. Leave the box and walk away. My name is Marcus, and for 4 grueling years, I delivered pizzas through the rain-slicked, darkened streets of the east side of Cleveland. I had grown accustomed to the cracked asphalt, the burned-out street lamps, and the constant, lingering scent of wet trash in the air. Most nights were just a repetitive cycle of stop signs and porch lights, but every driver eventually experiences a shift that leaves a permanent stain on their memory. It was a Thursday in late October, and the air was crisp with the approach of winter. Just before we were set to turn off the ovens, a call came in for 2 Meat Lovers pizzas and 2 sodas, to be paid in cash. Our cashier, Tina, was confused because the initial address provided didn't appear on any map we had. The caller eventually changed the destination to Milverton Road, a desolate stretch of half-vacant duplexes that was known as a dead zone for delivery drivers. 2 of our guys had been mugged in that exact area earlier that month, so my guard was immediately up. I didn't want to go alone, so I asked our line cook, Devin, to ride shotgun. He was a massive guy who carried a 6-foot metal dowel he called a dough rod. I grabbed a heavy piece of old exhaust pipe from my trunk, and we set off into the night. As we approached Milverton Road, the city became unnervingly quiet. There was no traffic, no music, just the rhythmic clicking of my turn signal. We pulled up in front of a drab, dilapidated greenhouse with sagging gutters and a single dim bulb over the porch. I killed the engine but kept the high beams focused on the house while Devin stepped out and leaned against the car fender, his metal rod clearly visible as a warning. I grabbed the pizza bag and walked up the path, my own reflection staring back at me from the dark windows. I reached the top step, but before I could even knock, the porch light suddenly blinked on and then died, plunging me into total darkness. I waited in the shadows, the steam from the pizzas fogging my glasses, and knocked twice on the door. The bulb began to stutter in a frantic, irregular rhythm before a man in worn boxers opened the door just a few inches. He wore a hospital wristband and stared at me with unblinking eyes, claiming he never ordered any food before slamming the door and sliding the deadbolt. I thought the prank was over and turned to leave, but then movement caught my eye across the street in a dark, overgrown playground. 4 figures dressed in black hoodies were standing perfectly still near the bushes, watching me instead of the house. One of them raised a hand, and I caught the glint of a metal object, perhaps a pipe or a weapon, shimmering under the distant streetlight. My heart hammered as I backed down the stairs, never taking my eyes off the hooded figures across the road. Devin saw the threat and shifted his weight, angling his metal dowel like a weapon, silently daring the group to step into the light of our car. The air was thick with tension. Nobody moved, but the intent was clear. They were waiting for me to be vulnerable. I reached the car and scrambled inside, locking the doors immediately as Devin slid into the passenger seat. I threw the car into drive and sped away, watching the hooded figures remain rooted in the shadows until they finally faded from view. Back at the shop, we logged the incident with shaky hands, adding our report to a growing pile of shady tickets from that neighborhood. I drove home that night on well-lit main roads, unable to shake the image of that flickering porch light. The very next evening, Devin burst into the kitchen with a grim update. A driver from a rival pizza chain had taken a late call to Milverton. It was the exact same order, placed at the same time. But that driver had gone to the house alone. Two men had ambushed him, dragging him into the tall weeds and fracturing his cheekbone with the butt of a handgun. They emptied his pockets and stole his cash while his car sat idling in the street, yet none of the neighbors came out to help. The police traced the phone number from our ticket, but it led to a prepaid burner phone that had been purchased miles away with cash. A dead end. I quit the delivery business shortly after that, opting for factory work where the risks felt manageable. Even now, years later, I still tense up whenever I see a porch light flicker or blink in a dark neighborhood. I keep my windows rolled up tight whenever I'm forced to drive near Milverton Road, my hands gripping the wheel until my knuckles turn white. I often wonder if the man in the boxers was part of the setup, using the porch light as a signal to tell the men in the bushes when to strike. It's a thought that loops in my head during quiet nights when the hum of my refrigerator sounds too much like a buzzing light bulb. I still keep Devin's metal dowel in my trunk as a grim memento of that night, reminding me that the world is much darker than it appears. Now, whenever I see a delivery driver slowing down in a dark neighborhood, I whisper a silent warning, knowing they have no idea what might be waiting in the shadows.